So welcome back to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with founders and leaders from some of today's top marketplaces. So this is episode 80, which is a really great group chat that we just had with Bunim Laskin, who's the CEO of Swimply. So Swimply is a marketplace for pool sharing that's recently seen a surge in demand and has expanded to over 130 cities in the US. So it's an earlier stage marketplace, but one that's quickly scaled and become a common name in the world of marketplaces. So this is a really great group chat with Bunim, where we got to learn more about the founding story of Swimply, how it's scaled to be the leading marketplace for pool sharing, some unique insights, learnings, and also lessons along the way, and had a great Q&A for those on the chat. So really enjoyed it, and I know you're going to find it a great watch to the end. So Bunim, welcome to the group chat, and it's definitely great to have you join us here today. So Swimply has come up so many times, and lots of the past group chat guys have told me that I need to connect with you. So I'm really excited that we did get a chance to finally connect and that you're joining us here today. Before we jump into things and learning more about Swimply as a marketplace, I think it'd be great if you can start off by sharing a little bit more on your background for those that don't know you.
Sure. So my background's pretty short and to the point. I grew up in Israel. I was there until I was 15 years old. I have 11 younger siblings, 9 younger sisters, and 2 younger brothers. My family moved to New Jersey my freshman year of high school, but I went to Miami Beach because in Israel, Miami was much cooler than Jersey. And so when my family moved there, I took the opportunity to go to high school there. After 4 years in Miami, I went back to Israel to study abroad. I was getting a bachelor's in what we call Talmudic law. On my 3rd year there, my mom requested that I come home for the summer because she was having her 12th child. And that was the summer of 2018. And that was when ultimately that summer was when Swimply kind of happened. So Swimply is my first job, my first gig, definitely my first startup. And so, yeah, it's pretty much it, really. So not a lot to share on that front, fortunately or unfortunately so.
No, thanks for sharing with us. So, what was like that founding story of Swimply then?
Sure. So I was home for December of 2018, and we never really had the means for anyone to go to camp or travel. And if you send one kid to camp, you have to send all 12 of us. And so the default was nobody goes. And so growing up was always kind of like wild with all of us in one house, especially in the summers when there was no school. And ultimately, with me being home in 2018 and the new baby, it was just a bit intense. And so my neighbor built a pool 3 years earlier for her grandkids. And she kind of never let us anywhere near it. Essentially figured if she lets us use it once, we'll pretty much all live in her backyard. And so she was very protective. But that summer, I just offered to pay her. And she suggested instead of paying me, help me pay for it. And so we agreed to pay 25% of whatever expenses would be. And we had a first come, first serve basis. This is around June 2018. And then when people noticed the worst family in the block being accommodated by the Karen of the block, people were intrigued. And ultimately, within a week and a half, she had 5 other families paying her 25% of her expenses. And I knew other families were using it. I didn't really understand how entrepreneurial this pool owner became at the time, until she made a group chat and she added all the families onto there, and she just posted the bill and said, everyone please pay up. And then everyone happily just posted paid. And that was like when I was like, shit, just woman's making money. And she's what used to cost her money, it was making money. And we all had this like higher quality lifestyle. Just instantaneously. And so late June, I went on Google Earth, found 80 swimming pools, knocked on 80 doors, got 4 of them to agree to let me call them up. There was no website in 2018. It was pretty much the hotline, 732-566-pool. You'd call me, I'd call you back, I'd call the owner, I'd charge you over Square, and then I would deliver checks biweekly. And so we got 4 pools to agree to let me be their pool pimp. And we just put flyers around town, coffee shops, barbershops, just local fashion stores. They would take it down, they put it back up. Ultimately, once we started getting a few bookings, it just spread like wildfire, because when you book a Swimply, you come with friends and you'll share, because with the experience itself, as opposed to enabling one. People tend to share it a lot on social media and how they spend their days. And it spreads very aggressively hyperlocally. So we don't have that Airbnb effect where it goes from city to city, but hyperlocally it spreads like fire. And so we did 40 grand in bookings that year, which was 10 grand was same business model. Today we charged the guest 10% additional fee. We took 15% from the host. That was like the most amount of money I've ever seen in my life at the time. And so I decided I wasn't going to go back and finish my schooling in Israel. And so this was 2018. I raised 1.2 million by March. Not a lot of connections onto tech where I come from. It's a pretty ultra Orthodox community. It's pretty much everyone's either studying Talmud till the day they die, or they go into real estate. So my connection to funding was eventually through just the real estate world and how Swimply can eventually redefine the space that people invest in. And so used that pitch to get up my pre-seed funding, I guess you'd call it, or seed funding. Didn't really know the terms for any of this at the time. Raised the 1.2 million, took over a friend's failing startups engineering team in Ukraine, built out the MVP in 2019, launched it, called it Swimply, bought the domain off, ironically, an Israeli dude that wanted like 30 grand for it. And then when I started talking to him in Hebrew, he agreed to give it to me for $250. And so I managed to secure the name. I just knew I wanted our own award, quote unquote, as opposed to Poolside. I think that was the competing name. And so we went 2019, we do around 170K in bookings organically, mainly just focusing on bugs and the platform and me doing customer support, pretty much. And then we, in 2020, pandemic hits, we lose 15% of our hosts. At the time we had like 1,400, we have 400 hosts. We lose like 15% of them. And a lot of our bookings at this point were really 50% families, 50% like pool parties, swimming lessons, multiple families getting together, like gathering together at swim plays. So we lost 50% of the business and 15% of the supply. And for like a week, we actually lost everything because nobody was like leaving their houses and people were terrified. But then eventually we kind of like shifted the whole company towards the perfect contact-free escape. Like from the get-go, Swimply has been pretty, the pitch to owners was effortless hosting. Like you don't have to do anything really. Like most people that invest in like their kind of backyards people reserve on Swimply, they're social investments, and there's always pretty much a way for, if you're going to have a party there or events, it's almost always architected in a way designed that not everybody has to walk through your entire house to get there. And so it was always like self-serve process from the guest end, and then they would leave, and the average experience is around 2 hours long, and that was going to be it. And then you get paid directly. And so that we really leaned into that side of the business pretty deeply. Sent a bunch of journalists to pools. During the pandemic, they were all very happy to take us up on the offer to get out of their houses. And then that combined with Shark Tank, which we aired on, which was March 2020. We actually aired March 13th, 2020. That was the day all the lockdowns went into effect. So right when we were like, okay, this is going to blow us up, the lockdowns go into effect, and we have like literally $0 in revenue for like a week. And we're like, okay, this is toast. At that point, the company was 4 people. 2 of them left after that. And so the company was just me and one other dude. And but then we just once we started offering journalists, and they saw that we were on Shark Tank, and so they thought this company is legit. We were able to use at least the credibility of Shark Tank to just start for these journalists to take us seriously. And then we just blew up from there. And so we ended up doing like 5 million GBV in 2020, and the bookings were very different than what we were used to. We were used to like a lot of pool parties, a lot of music videos, even swimming lessons were a big use case in 2019. But these were pretty much what we started seeing new of were health swims, like people just literally swimming for an hour. We saw a lot of people training. We saw a lot of pet swims, people taking pets just took off like crazy. And then families. So there was no longer like families getting together, like you getting together with your cousins or another family or your next neighbor, but there's families just hanging out on their own. And then, so that just took off, and the repeat rate was just huge. And people made it more into a lifestyle than like an event based. It was more whim based than event based. We lowered all the pricing as well, and we convinced owners to lower the pricing. And also, we got supply, a lot of supply from Airbnb started joining because people were traveling less, and they joined and they stayed because we were just making more per hour than they usually make per week. And for a lot of Airbnb hosts, this was their primary residence. So when they rented out, they would stay by like their in-laws, but now they could stay in the house while they were renting out the property. So it was just a more convenient solution for them. The product grows like crazy. We learn a lot about the consumer behavior around Swimply. Users aren't very happy. The product is, though, because the product's very buggy, and we had no in-house engineers, and so everything was going really slow. And customer support was like obviously completely inundated, just going from like 400 to 3,000 hosts, and then pretty much no one on customer support to help anybody. And so users were furious on that front. But we actually used that to pitch investors afterwards, saying like, look how shitty our product is and how shitty our support is, and they're still like using us religiously. And so like, despite us, the business is growing. And so we raised 10 million as a seed round in January of this year from Norwest. The company at the time was just me and my friend. We used that to bring on our first hire. She was actually a VC that we pitched. That when we ended up going with Norwest, she jumped ship and joined us as our employee number one. We hired our head of engineering, who ended up bringing on 7 other engineers really quickly, which was ridiculously helpful considering we had to catch up on a shit ton of technical debt before the following summer. And we just built out like a ridiculously awesome customer support system. The woman we brought on was ridiculously obsessed with customer support. And so she just went like all out 24/7, just dramatic improvement from 2020. And so we built out a supply support system called the Pool Team that was not just reactive customer support, but proactive, helping them price, take photos, manage their businesses, collect their thoughts, sometimes even doing marriage counseling if needed, like just really developing relationships with the host. That was like pretty much their job. And then just a massive customer support team. We heavily invested on just bodies, really, just not just people that can like, to the point that doesn't really scale so well, but for now is something that we're just going to offer like ridiculously excellent customer support. And then we've just been really reactive up until this point, really focusing on products, listening to users. What do they need? Can we make this easier? Learning a lot about how spontaneous the experience is. So besides for the bookings, like half the bookings being same day and 80% of the bookings being within 3 days, 95% of the bookings being same week within 7 days. The bookings themselves are also just very fragile. They need to move over 30 minutes. They have last minute guests coming that they want to add to the booking. The owner, it's fragile on the owner's end as well, small technicality on their pool. And so building a lot of tools that we can help them manage just like dynamic booking essentially, and how spontaneous it would be, how dramatic the different experiences are. Unlike other kind of marketplaces, our guest side experience is really diverse. It can go from 2 senior citizens working out before work to 40 college kids. And so managing those different experiences, pricing them, rules, and instant versus requests. Some bookings are instant, some bookings are you have to approve, and stuff. Just developing all these tools to streamline the business as much as we can. And we recently just we closed out this year we're going to hit 19 million GBV by the end of the year, and then we just closed another. They're calling it the A. I'm confused because the first one was the A, but this one's the A, so I'm not really sure. So now they're trying to say that one's a seed, and this one, just because based on where our company is infrastructure wise, it's not looking like we're really a B, considering we were 2 people a few months ago. And so we just raised another 30 million and took another 10 million in debt. And so 40 million total. And we're pretty much using these funds to, now that we've kind of did figure out our product quite meaningfully, obviously a long way to go, but and we also figured out the support side our defense is pretty strong, I would say. And now we're trying to get more proactive about our growth. So we're making our first growth hires now on that front. Product, performance, lifecycle, partnerships, sales, just trying to build up most of the growth functions and levers. And our goal for 2022 Two, besides for growth, always is really to try to turn Swimply into a science, really start learning about the consumer behavior. Our challenge is that we're not just a brand new like business, we're a brand new way that people are behaving. We know how people book flights, we know how people book cars, transportation. We don't know anything about how people are behaving, sort of merging people's space and lives. And so we're kind of figuring that out in real time. And we're noticing that there's like just ridiculous amount of variables from the city that they're in to who they are, to their age, how they're going to use our platform. And so our goals for 22 are really to figure out the marketplace like dynamics that really makes Swimply successful, and how do we make it successful for different demographics, and develop a growth team that can do something about it, and actually proactively grow, as opposed to just relying on word of mouth and PR, which has been our pretty much biggest driver to date. Yeah, that's the gist. That's the gist of it, pretty much. So
Yeah,
this round
that's
closed last week, so we're pretty much that you literally caught up.
yeah, huge congrats on that, by the way. Yeah, so and that's pretty incredible, initial kind of founding story. And I did want to focus on, the earlier stages of it. So, kind of going back, did you intend to start a venture scale marketplace?
I mean, absolutely not. What the word startup didn't exist. Like Brian Chesky talks about how I didn't know what an angel investor was back in the day. I didn't know what an investor was at all. Like where, like I didn't really even go to I went to a religious high school. We don't like religious in Israel. Just the whole thing is pretty much all trying to gear you up to becoming a rabbi, essentially. So all the lingo was kind of completely out of the way. For me, it was just like, okay, this, like in the beginning, I was like, okay, this could be a cool way to make money in the summer before I go back to Israel. And then once it just grew as meaningfully as it was, like my goal was to make $1,000. Like that was my goal, make $1,000. I was literally like, if I make $1,000, this would be a worthwhile, like investment of my time. I'm living at home. Like $1,000 is a lot of money for me at the time. So that was kind of the goal. And then when I made $10,000 for myself, it was like, okay, how do I grow this? And so eventually just learning about like, okay, it's got to be a website because I'm not going to be able to do the phone calls, and pretty much just constantly, I was just ridiculously naive, like every step of the way till today, just ridiculously naive, kind of just learning everything that I needed as far as my headlights can see, with no potential light that I'm driving towards. So it was really just, when I initially started, it wasn't anything like that. My neighbor making that group chat is what made me want to turn into a business. It going from what I thought would make me $1,000 to $10,000 is what made me decide that, okay, I can, if this is working really well, I can bring this to the world. And I didn't know what that was called yet. And so that's really where I went.
Yeah, no, that's definitely great. So, you did kind of mention too that like initial kind of marketplace, like product experience, right? So how has how has that experience kind of evolved as you scaled?
Referring just to the product process?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And maybe even kind of going beyond just like that product, right? Like at what stages did you realize that like maybe trust, safety, and kind of insurance and some of those other kind of factors that are involved in marketplaces are, going to be something important?
Yeah. So in 2019 was our first attempt to take all those phone calls and try to transmit it into a product. So we really just focused on details, like what kind of questions are we going to ask supply that we know the demand's going to ask for. And that was pretty much all we did in 2019. And we modeled it around Airbnb, like not going to reinvent the wheel. That's how people are booking homes. This is how they're going to book pools. And so all the information was architected like a home sharing marketplace. And the booking flow is all architected around that. And then just watching it break slowly as like we learned that things are much more spontaneous. The guests, the pricing didn't really make much sense because you can come with 2 and you can come with 40 in Airbnbs, largely based off a base price. And if you come with 2 or 3 more guests, and that's really the variable, but like not 35 more guests. And so just I think like the more fascinating part was that like once we made it a website, how spontaneous it became. People are trying to book like 10 minutes before a booking, essentially. And just our platform did not accommodate for that whatsoever, on the demand and supply side. And so from an availability perspective and from just a host being able to accept that booking that quickly, like was not there. There was no such thing as instant book, and we didn't think that would be so important until later. It was ridiculously important right away. because that was like the main use case, needed instant book sort of for the flow, but nobody wanted to be instant book because I'm down to instant book a family of 5. I'm not down to instant book 40 people in my backyard this Saturday. And so really just we've been really reactive literally up until now, just like what's broken, like how can we make this experience seamless? How can we get out of the way as soon as possible? Like our goal is for them not to spend as much time on our app as possible. Like our goal is to literally they want to get into the pool. We want to get out of the way so they can get into the pool as quickly as possible. So just figuring out why are they still here, like, and try to solve that and streamline it.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear. So on the note of like the host side, could you kind of maybe share an example of like a host that's on your platform, and then maybe some of like the typical earnings?
Sure. I mean, this summer is when we learned about the super hosts, really. So the highest earning host in 2019 was $1,500. The highest earning host in 2020 was 20 grand. And we have a host that, as of last week, hit $200,000 for the year. And so, which broke a whole bunch of other things, because our platform initially started as a way to like pay for your pool, right? And then like that was the pitch, have it pay for itself. And so I have a couple of bookings here and there. And then in 2020, we obviously saw that host that earned 20 grand, and so they had a bunch of bookings, but it was manageable. And then now we have these top tier hosts that are earning 6 figures, and they're dealing with dozens of hosts. So one of these hosts, Jim, from Portland, he has $160,000 in bookings to date. He's had over 3,000 people that he's hosted this year in 2021. And so our platform, our host management platform, was not built for that at all. Like it was built to like handle a couple of bookings, not dozens, hundreds. The guy that did 200,000, he's had over 1,000 bookings this year. And so, because you can do several bookings a day, 7 to 9, that's going to be like the senior citizen. That's like going to swim in the morning, but he's going to have like the family in the afternoon. He's going to have a group of friends at night. Like he's going to just turn, and a lot of these people, 80% of our hosts, shockingly, actually take that money and reinvest it into their backyard, and they create like cooler spaces. They'll get like a flat screen, they'll get a fridge there, they'll get beers, they'll offer these ridiculous experiences, some champagne on Wednesdays if you book up. Like they'll just run their own businesses and even use that money to market their own pool. So like on the supply side, because we're marketing hyper locally, they know who their demand is, and so they don't really need us for marketing. They're putting up their own flyers the way I did, with barcodes to their listing. They're doing paid ads around their listing that takes them to their listing, not Swimply. They're doing a lot of their own marketing. And when we noticed that, we started like, first thing the pool team did was like talk to all those hosts. What are you guys doing? How are you guys earning so much in the middle of Alabama? Like it's definitely not our marketing efforts. And so I'm trying to coach as many hosts as possible. From Facebook groups, moms groups, they just do their own marketing because they know we're marketing to their community and neighbors. They don't really need us for that. Like we're going to help, but they've been doing a lot of it a lot better. That also assisted. Hosts are really much better at getting demand than we are, because when we're a quirky startup from LA saying, hey, book a stranger's backyard, doesn't land as well as somebody saying, hey, this is my beautiful backyard, you can reserve it by the hour, and stuff like that. So for the demand, for the supply side, they're earning a tremendous amount more than we ever expected. And so right now we're developing tools, analytics, and like booking management flows that allow them to really manage like hundreds of bookings seamlessly, see what they're earning seamlessly, and even tools to motivate them to do their own marketing, because they can. On Airbnb, there'd be no point of supplying that. Like, what are they going to do? Market to like the entire planet for the next time you're in Queens? And Uber can't do that either, because the demand only cares about the fastest ride, period. But for us, they're more like coffee shops than Airbnbs. They're all marketing hyperlocally with their own complete independence. And what we're banking on is that they'll stay on the platform for the insurance, the support, the payment collection, and just trying to make a product that they can't live without.
Yeah, that's really incredible to hear about the host earnings, and that was I'm glad you covered it, because I was going to ask about if you're seeing them kind of reinvest into the experience. So you did mention being a hyperlocal marketplace, and it's pretty cool to hear that some of the hosts are kind of marketing on your behalf. So how are you thinking about kind of marketing and managing liquidity across markets?
Yeah, so we're in the early phases. I'm trying to figure out what our GTM really is and what kind of skills we need to bring on board. So one of our investors this round, we have two people that like face this that invested in the round that I've been harassing quite frequently. One of them is the founder of Airbnb, one of the founders of Airbnb, Nathan Blacharzik. And I have a strict right to harass agreement with him. And then Brad Lyle, the founder and CEO of Bird, right? And the struggle is that both his businesses are like, I'm trying my best. We're trying our best not to reinvent the wheel as much as we can. So there's two things we're really trying to get to. One is figuring out what success looks like on Swimply. What is that critical mass? Airbnb they need 100 pools with 3 reviews to get to like 1% conversion. What does that number look like for us? What is the amount of supply that we need in order to be able to create a perfect experience for demand? We used to think it was we used to look at it, how many guests do we need per pool to make that pool successful? And then this summer, we also realized that it works vice versa. How many pools does a guest need? Because for us to create a super guest, like somebody that just uses us frequently, we have to be a very reliable experience. Like he says, hey, I want to go, and we have a pool for him. And if he only has one pool that he likes and that pool's taken and now he's screwed, like the next time he doesn't see us as a platform that he can just book and go. He's got to like plan it out and see if he gets lucky, and people will just say, fuck it, I'm just gonna do something else. And so we need to become a very reliable business for them, and a reliable like book on a whim and just go. And so we know that we do, like all our super guests, right, had more than one pool that they loved. They had like 4 pools that they would frequent constantly. And when we speak to them, it's because they have their favorite pool, their second favorite pool, their third favorite pool, and their fourth favorite pool. And if they're booked, they eventually just go to where they like, and they have all their 4 pools on their favorites. And every once in a while they'll look on we notify all the people locally when there's a new pool. They like that pool, they'll add it to their favorites. If they don't, they'll never see it again. And they have their pools that they develop relationships with. They buy them flowers once in a while, and like that's the listing. So we know that in order to create these users that are booking 30, 40 times a year, we need to get them more than one pool. And we need different pricings. We need $30 an hour pools, and we need $100 an hour pools, depending on the guest. So we have a lot of questions that we're trying to answer right now over the next like 2 to 3 months to get like at least early ground. And then we are probably going to go through the model of like do it at all costs, recreate that business model. Probably a mix of, so right now what we're aiming towards is like, we have this pool team that they just know everything about pools. And we started hiring a sales team, and we're probably just going to send them for like 2 weeks to our top markets to create those events at all costs. So optimizing our existing listings, pricing and photography and detail wise and availability wise, and then turn all those listings into ambassadors, create events, and have those listings get other pool owners that we're going to invite to these events to onboard. And pretty much the ROI at the acquisition for the supply side here is really we're not foreseeing that's going to be very intelligent at scale. So this is really a build the business at all costs, whether it costs us $5,000 a host or $50 a host. That's kind of a high level philosophy that we're gonna identify the top 10 markets. We're gonna figure out what the science looks like for the best possible market for Swimply based on what's already happening on the platform, and then pay whatever we have to and do whatever we need to do to recreate those markets to make them flawless before the summer comes around, and essentially just spend the majority of the summer on demand generation. So that's kind of how we're looking at it. But there is Nate from Airbnb, the one finding that the one thing that was interesting is that when they were looking initially at their marketplaces, the idea of ROI, LTV was irrelevant. It was a very binary question. Do we have a business there or not? And so you invest whatever it takes to just say, yes, I do have a business there. And then it lives on forever. So to get to the point where you don't have a business to yes business, it doesn't really matter. You pay whatever it takes to get it happen. However long it takes you to open up this mall or whatnot, you invest whatever it takes. And then at that point, once you have this business, it's a yes, then it's about optimizing the business and preparing it for scale. So we're looking for where can we get a business. We're going to spend whatever it takes and do whatever it takes to make it a binary yes to that question. And probably not going to really focus on like optimizing the ROI on acquisition for quite a while.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I'm definitely glad you brought that up. So just for some context, how many markets do you operate in?
So because most of our growth has been organic, And just word of mouth, and hosts were able to do their own marketing. We are technically all over the place. We haven't really proactively launched in any as much as they've just been sprouting out. So we're in over 130 cities. Technically, there's around 15,000 listings in Swimply right now in 130 cities. But there's where we see the quote unquote success is with concentration. So like LA is our biggest city by far. LA does like a quarter of our revenue, and then followed by what we call the metro area. This is so far right now how we've defined our top markets. We have Los Angeles City, the New York metro area, Austin, Texas. Then we have and then Portland is a standout because of its own consumer behavior. In Portland, it's just a very fucked uply awesome city, except for some reason. We're trying to figure out why, but that city is incredible. And then the Washington, Maryland area over there. So pretty much 5 places consist of like 80% of our revenue, even though we're in like what we would identify high level as a little over 130 locations.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So you did mention that press has driven a lot of your growth. So I'd love to learn more about how you initially got so much press coverage, and then is that something you kind of think through where you have like an ongoing strategy or?
And at first it wasn't. At first it was just like I emailed journalists and offered them free days in a pool at the nicest pools that we had, and like heavily coached the owner to be like ridiculously awesome. And so it was really like it was what we could afford at the time. And what we kind of prayed to God for that they would accept. And we never pitched it that they need to write about us in exchange. Just like, hey, we want to offer you this awesome experience. And then 7 out of 10 times they would write about it. And so it would pretty much just came at the cost of whatever that pool was, because the owner would still need to get paid. Sometimes we convinced the owner to do it for free because we told them this pool would be featured, even if we couldn't really guarantee that or whatnot. And so now it's much more of like we have somebody in-house that runs that, because it is such a powerful, it is a softball for us because we're weird as hell. And there's so many different angles to Swimply, and so many different, because we have so many different demographics, and people use this for so many different ways, whether it's health or spending time together. Like everything that we do is ridiculously good. And it's pretty much like I guess there are some negative connotations to our business, especially when it comes to like neighbors. Like you could imagine that person that hosted 3,000 people here, his neighbors probably have a word or two to say with him. And so that's where it is. But on the consumer side, there is really just this positive impact. And so there's so many different, like Sports Illustrated wrote an article about a host who, opened up their pool to like all of these like professional swimmers that needed a place to like practice close to home. And like, so there's an angle for them. There's all these health magazines. So there's just so many different ways that a pool fits into, and leisure time, you can say, just fits into these stories. It's a softball for us. So we really do have somebody in-house that proactively works out that strategy, who we're going to go after, what's our narrative for college kids versus like TMZ, as opposed to like Forbes, as opposed to like mommy bloggers and stuff like that. So it is a much more proactive, intent-based function today.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear. So we're going to get into questions here in a little bit. But before we do, I definitely wanted to ask about the fundraising journey. So you have some pretty awesome investors on board. A few that you mentioned that are advisors that you can turn to and kind of hit up also. So what has that fundraising journey been like?
Hideous, and then not really. So the seed round was, I pitched 100 people until I pitched 85 people until one said yes. I pitched 100 total through that round. And then I tried in 2019, I did try, after that, we went from like that 40K to 170K. I tried to raise a $2.5 million round, failed. So it was my first time in San Francisco, pitched a bunch of VCs, got my ass whooped. And then we just went back to work, and then we grew the business. And then 2020, when we woke up, when we came up for air, quote unquote, no pun intended, we had a couple of term sheets already there. So it was very strange where we could never get anybody to the door when we wanted them there. And then we kind of were more dealt with the other side of the politics, where you have a bunch of term sheets and you have to like figure out that whole investor, like the whole email writing skills sets thing really just had to kick in there. And so our seed round failed at it, so we didn't raise, and that's why that 10 million. That's why they want to call it a seed and whatnot. And that seed round was that Series A actually worked out quite seamlessly. That 10 million initially, that initial institutional funds in early January. There's one fund from Austin that reached out to us, and we flew there, and they gave us a term sheet. And then word got out that we had a term sheet, and so a bunch of people. And then it really just became like negotiating and trying not to lose the term sheet while trying to get other people to the table and that whole game. And it's the first time anyone's offering you real institutional funds, so you really just want to take it immediately and not risk it, especially because they're like, oh, you have 24 hours to say yes, and it's going to take you more than 24 hours to get them back. So just learning all the tricks of the trade, you ask for reference calls and whatnot, and just trying to buy time because you don't want to lose it. You really want this, but you are also trying to think about the interests of the company, and what would do best for its future, its long-term success. And so that was more of the journey over there. And for this round, ironically, we were going to be a lot more disciplined about it. Like we planned it very strategically. Like we're going to start pitching in September. We're going to go on this road show, and we're going to start pitching like the people that we don't really want their money, just so they can poke holes in our like growth and our story and like in our model, optimize, get answers to those questions, and then get to the tier one investors that we were hoping to get. One of my closest mentors was the founder of Poshmark, Manish. And before we started the roadshow, he introduced me to his pre-seed investor. As like, hey, before you start, just use him. It's not going to be a serious phone call. He's just going to like pick your brain. He's been with me for the last 11 years. And so you'll gain a lot before you do the fundraise. That was kind of the idea, setting up that initial conversation before. And then like 7 minutes in, he started offering terms. And so that fucked up everything. And so that was really, and we ended up going with their term sheet to lead the round.
Yeah, that's great. It's always interesting to hear the stories of fundraising. So
yeah, man plans, God laughs, dude.
Yeah, right. Well, we're gonna jump into questions here. Hey, Carlos, do you want to jump on?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And thanks for sharing all this information. This has been awesome. So I run a similar marketplace. It's called Juego, and we focus really just kind of like on the athletic space. So I can probably talk for hours and days about all the growth pains and learnings that I've had on my side, which I'm sure you're kind of encountering on your side as well. So I'm just kind of curious, like, what were some of the constraints like early on that you kind of heard like from either hosts kind of sharing their space, and how did you kind of overcome them, or really just kind of sell it to them like, hey, this is like the earning potential that you could have? So I'm really interested in learning just the constraints that some of these folks had before signing up on the platform.
Yeah, sure. I mean, but we should definitely jam for in a similar space one of these days. But there was two real issues. One was educating people. Like, there's no like quick way to say it, and so they needed to like learn that we exist, understand how it works, and even then not think it's super insane. And so the only people that I've ever gone through all three phases myself was those initial pools that I knocked on their doors from, and I was only successful 4 out of 80 people. Looking back, the conversion wasn't so bad, but at the time you had 76 literal doors slammed on you. You definitely don't feel the best about it. But there's most of what we ended up leveraging was getting guests to tell people about it. Right? Like guests telling people, hey, they just booked this pool. And so like we try to humanize it a shit ton. But the concerns from the supply side was really just like, okay, how does this work? And by the time we would explain how it worked, we had no time left to try to normalize and actually pitch the idea. And so like their bandwidth pretty much would stop after they understood how it worked, and as opposed to already understanding what it worked and then just pitching how safe and secure it is. And these are mainly families and stuff like that. And so that was probably the hardest part, just to pitch to them and trying to market that, and even in a proper way that didn't make us look crazy. Ultimately, the only thing that really worked for us, like in 2019, was getting demand. We're offering demand exuberant amount of money to just get supply for us. And that was pretty much the only initiative we did that ever worked, was like Supply saying, hey, I booked this guy's pool. It was such an awesome experience. You should like open it up. And if they were able to humanize it, the pitch was so quick because this person's saying what their experience was. I booked this guy's pool by the hour, and it was ridiculously humanized because like they know the person. So it's no longer like a no face stranger in their backyard. It's like, oh, it's people like him or her that are booking my pool. And so using ambassadors was really our best way to pitch the story. The worst conversion was always if it came from us. Yeah, that was that. Oh, and then there was safety, obviously. Besides for it being weird, okay, I would love to do this, but liability. And we did not offer liability insurance in day one. So it was pretty much just like, hey, we have a waiver, but it doesn't really cover you. You should look into it with your own lawyer, kind of thing, kind of like what Airbnb did for like the first like 7 years. And then this year, so the platform was pretty much made up of like the tightrope walkers up until April of this year when we started offering insurance. That was actually the only reason like our Series A wasn't like ridiculously seamless. Like it was still a lot of people that even when we had the term sheet, a lot of people were hesitant because they didn't think we were able to get insurance for our business model so early on because there's just not a lot of data out there to be able to analyze it. Like they were trying to compare it to water parks and shit like that, like things we didn't want to be compared to. And so we were not able to get it in 2020, but we ended up getting it in 2021 in April, just showing them our experiences and modeling out our own data. And so insurance was another huge one. That was actually our biggest reason for deactivations. People would sign up not knowing about that issue. And then a friend of theirs or somebody would mention it and they would deactivate. So
awesome. Thank you. That's super helpful. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a great question. I was actually going to ask about the, what stage did you offer insurance myself? So glad you mentioned it. Hey, Bob, do you want to jump on?
Yeah, my question was early identification was Google Earth. Was that your primary tool for identifying potential people to reach out to? Was just, hey, who has a pool, and then trying to identify the address that goes to with that pool, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, so day one, that was the only way. We haven't yet formed that process into something that scales well. Right now, like the pool team literally like manually, painstakingly goes through these houses. And when we throw events for a host, we invite those houses. We'll send them postcards and knock on their doors, inviting them to those events that we throw for hosts on the platform and tell them, hey, come check it out, chat with hosts. But we haven't really used it yet to proactively grow aggressively, mainly because we haven't focused so much on growth to date. But we have used it to like invite people. We use Google Earth literally just to invite people to events so far.
Gotcha.
You see it scaling through some sort of like scrape mechanism or something like that, where we can just kind of identify it without like manually using Google Earth to like tag homes. Probably some lever we're going to look into in 2022.
Right. Or maybe there's a parallel business like pool supply companies, or somebody that would have access to a database that you could piggyback.
Yeah, I mean, I actually chatted. I think Caroline, I think maybe you and I chatted about this like a year or two ago. When we actually partnered up with like 2 large pool companies that service like thousands of pools, and we figured, perfect, like we're the best thing to ever happen to this industry. Like a pool is like considered a money waster, and now we're going to make it profitable and rational. So they obviously want to partner with us. They did obviously want to partner with us. They partnered with us. That's where it ended. It was just impossible to nurture. Like it sounds so good on paper, but until like our value to them was short-term value, not long-term. Like, hey, long-term, all your clients sign up on Swimply, they'll have a shit ton more money, right? And more money in your client's pants are like the best thing that you can hope for, especially if their pool's the one making for it. And you can eventually use this to pitch us to people who don't have pools yet, that like they can use it to have it pay for itself. Several hosts on our platform already have their pool and their backyard paid for just by like in 1 year. So like, even if you're not one of those hosts, okay, 4 years, like 5 years until you have a free dope ass backyard. So like, it'd be a great pitch, and they're all fascinated but then their day job kicks in of just cleaning pools, and then that's the last you hear from them. So it's something that we're going to try to maybe explore again, but not with franchises as much as we will have like directly nurturing the relationship. Like, you manage these two relationships, that's your job, like get all their pools. But on a high level, like we signed with corporate and we thought that they would just like mobilize their dozens of
yeah. And that's a speaking of hyper local, that's, the pool guy is very similar to the gardener or any of those kind of service, and it's super hyper local. And like a lot of those guys are not going to be with a built out website that they're easy to find. It's one guy with a truck who's trying to work off as much cash as possible so he doesn't have to report his full income to the government. And so that makes it even harder for you to try to find those guys and partner with those guys.
Yeah, I mean, those guys are the worst case scenario in this kind of thing, but none of them are businessmen. Like you kind of look at them, hey, they're business owners, you're a business owner, but there's a difference between being a business owner and a businessman. Like none of them really are. Like they like pools and they like cleaning those pools and like going in, like going out. Like you have to like meaningfully impact their bottom line every day to get them to be like, oh, I should like take this seriously and do more shit on top of what I'm already doing. It's very difficult to turn them into like entrepreneurs and partners in a business. Very difficult.
Yeah, I picture those guys being a lot of like, hey, they're happy to own the job that they have. They look at themselves as being their own boss, but they're not looking at ways to scale and hire and be a business person. They're just hey, I get to be outside all day and I can go from pool to pool. And so I could see that not being really worth the effort, essentially.
Partnerships in general sound very nice, high level, but they don't ever really trickle down too beautifully.
I'm glad you say that.
Yeah.
we didn't make it work as well.
Yeah, partnerships are always an interesting one with marketplaces. So, hey, I did actually have a question for you myself. It's a topic that comes up in the group quite frequently, which is with being a vertical marketplace, and especially when it comes to fundraising. Like what has been your thoughts and kind of approach with going super deep and focusing on penetrating as much as the market as possible versus thinking through, hey, do we potentially expand categories?
Yeah. So from the get-go, like our first slide for the last two, pitch decks was literally every passion needs a space. And our reason for focusing so deeply on pools is because it attracts everybody, as mentioned, right? It's like pools are almost the best lead gen to get people into this ecosystem. Tennis courts will only bring tennis players, music studios will only bring musicians, pools will bring the world. And not only will it bring the world will bring their friends, and a lot of them. And our best, it was also the best way to like disarm the whole using stranger spaces. So pools were like the perfect front line to just get people into the funnel. And so from the get-go, it's smarter for us to invest in pools besides just because this is the best. If we're ever going to tackle the rest, this is our best way to get as many people in the ecosystem and create the consumer behavior of living in each other's space. And so that's been from the get-go, it's always been like our vision is much larger. Like we want to connect every passion on earth to a space that it needs. And the first thing that people do when they're economically privileged enough or lucky enough, is they invest in space that they get to be alive in and not just exist in, right? You start with like your bed where you sleep and your kitchen where you eat. And then and maybe like the space where you're alive in is your couch, where you're not really alive. You're another version of not. And so people invest in things that they're passionate about, whether it's an art studio, a pool to hang out with their friends, a basketball court. And so we kind of want to take those spaces and democratize them and open them up to like their community and develop these really authentic hyperlocal, category within people's lives. We want to give people a reason not to look forward to this weekend, but this afternoon, essentially, or not look forward to like the holiday or look that 3 times a year that you're going to go on vacation, but just incorporate like the things that you want to do into your day-to-day life without needing to, earn $500,000 or $1 million a year. And so that's kind of always been the vision that we pitched. And we're going to focus deeply on pools because it satisfies tremendous amounts of different use cases and demographics right now. But this year we do have it's like a 1-person job to really start experimenting early product market fit outside of pools. So, and we're only going to do that in Los Angeles. So really just connecting people with like tennis courts and sport courts and like poolless backyards, just so we can get early learnings in it, just because time is of the essence with everything. So regardless of resources.
So it's a good glimpse at what's ahead then for us. So I'm curious to learn a little bit more though, when you were pitching, during the fundraising process, was there some kind of, input or push from investors to go ahead and expand into new categories or?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people just flat out said no, because we said we're not going to expand into other categories this year, like meaningfully. A whole bunch. I mean, it was a TAM question for most of them, right? Like if this can be everything immediately, then that sounds huge. If it's just pools, then it sounds small. And it's actually wild how little it has to do with the numbers at some point with investors, right? Like when you get very deep, it has a lot to do with the numbers, but like then those initial conversations are ridiculously emotional. It's like, how big does it feel to the investor? It could be not big at all, but it feels big. They're much more inclined to do it, as opposed to if you say something like, this is an Airbnb for pools, that sounds small. And so emotionally, they just close off. You've showed them the unit economics and the numbers and the money. You told them, hey, it's much fucking larger than you think. But it sounds small, it feels small. And so like you're going to get a lot of it is just sex appeal in those first conversations. And so we used to have our pitch organized as Swimply, this is what we are today, and then talk about where we want to go. But by the time they got there, it just sounded so small. So that's why we put everything up front. Like every passion needs a space. And we started with pools. So big vision, this is where we're starting. As opposed to this is where we're starting, this is where we're going. And that would get people further along the deck.
Yeah, sounds like a great way to create that narrative. Definitely comes up quite regularly in the community though. So I think we have time for one more question. I just got a question over here in the chat. I think Anthony was asking though, when you launched in Australia a few years ago, did you have a team on the ground there, or was it remote?
I moved, so summer just ended in 2019, and we were looking to bring our service to, we know there are summers during our winter, and again, we were just ridiculously naive, like every step of the way. And so I just booked a flight to Australia and just got on there myself. Ended up moving down there for 2 months. I was in Sydney for a week, and then I was in Melbourne for the rest. I was in Brisbane for a day, just to get it some sort of understanding of the city. It's kind of ironic, you go on a plane 24 hours later and you come out, you almost want people to not be speaking the same language as you, but they feels like you just took the longest Uber ever. And then I just went there myself with a friend who wasn't even working for something. I'm like, hey, I'm going to Australia. I'm just trying to learn as much about it. Want to come with me? And he ended up just kind of working with me just because he was bored and trying to do stuff. And we just did the press thing, honestly, softball again, got a lot of press just to see will this pick up there at all? And it actually picked up quite quickly. And then we just fucked up the entire operation. We were people would sign up and people would try to pay, but we totally didn't think about the fact that our payment collection, processing was not available in Australia. We only set it up for the States. And so for 6 weeks after launching on this big day, nobody can book any pools at all. And so just nobody can collect money, nobody can pay. And the whole thing, people thought the whole thing was a scam. So we kind of really fucked that one up pretty badly. And then by the time we cleared up the issue, it was the hosts on there were already burnt out. The guests were this thing's not real. And the press didn't want to write about it anymore because we kind of gave you your chance and you just screwed us. So we fucked that one up bad. It was a learning experience.
Yeah, no, we've all had those learning experiences for sure. So cool. Well, this is a super interesting chat, and I appreciate taking the time to join us. Last question I had for you though, I was cruising around on your site though before this, and checking out some pools, and also saw you had some jacuzzis and spas here in LA. So what's one of your favorite pools on Swimply?
There's this pool in San Jose. It's a cliff pool. It's whatever you call them. It's literally on a cliff. It's one of the more expensive ones. It's $200 an hour. but that space is ridiculously magical. Like you feel like you just stepped into like Narnia or some shit. Like it was just, that one's by far my favorite. There's also one in Austin that I frequent a lot whenever I'm there. Like I do all my meetings out of that Swimply that looks over downtown Austin, which is nice. But those are like the two that, like, if I'm in the Bay, I'll literally drive out like to visit that host and hang out at their pool, and that one host in Austin that I also frequent a lot. About Caroline, a story you'll enjoy. When we were on the way to Australia, we found out during the stopover that this news station wanted to interview us and a host. It was like Channel 5 or something like that, but we had no supply there, like at all. But they wanted to interview us and a supply about our launch date in like 2 weeks. And I'm like, how am I supposed to get a pool? I have a flight there by the time I land the next morning. So me and my friend literally spoke to everybody on that flight, asked them whether they own a pool. Because funny story, we have this startup from New York at the time, and we have this press thing, and our company does this. And if you have a pool, we need you to pretend you're already on this platform. And that was actually our first pool that we got on in Australia. It was literally just driving that entire flight crazy. And the good news is it was a long ass flight, so we had time to convince one person on that. So,
can I ask a quick question before we finish?
Yeah, I think so.
It's just about pricing. If I'm just wondering if you give any suggestion to your host about pricing.
It's our number one. It's the number one problem that we have. Nobody knows what to price. There's no you can't look at the taxis and see what they charge, or the hotels and see what they charge. It's nobody knows. We just made a hire that's their only job, a data scientist, to figure out what should our recommendations be, how do they scale. Right now it's a bitch. We have the pool team just trying to convince people to lower their price. Right now, lower the better is all we do without any intelligent suggestions. It's probably, I'm going to say, the biggest challenge that we have right now is really figuring out pricing, because it's critical not for the first time use, but the repeat usage. Not going to be something they do every week.
It's my biggest issue, so that's why I was wondering if you managed to solve it or not. That seems like it's a big issue.
Yeah, it's a bitch.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks a lot.
That's a great last.
Yeah, sorry, I can't be helpful. It's hard. Yeah. Wish it could be.
Yeah, your comment though about going to Austin and the meetings at the pool had me kind of think that maybe we could do a everything marketplaces meet up at a pool here in LA. So.
Oh yeah, for sure. Ship me up. I know a guy.
Yeah. Right. So, well, awesome. Well, this is a really fun chat, and so you have some pretty incredible, stories from, initially kind of building and scaling us Swimply to where you're at today. And, a huge congrats on all the progress and, the recent close on that. So before we end though, time for a quick plug. Where can we keep up with you at?
Oh, I mean, with me or Swimply? I mean, me, nowhere. I'm not really a social media guy. Swimply.com. We have Instagram. We got TikTok. We got a fire TikTok strategy this summer. We got a house on the hills. And just put a ton of influencers in there, and we just threw a ton of parties. And the way that influencers were allowed in is you had to make a TikTok at the Swimply house to be allowed into the parties, literally a contract at the door. So that worked out quite well for us as a fun experiment. No tracking, so don't ask me if I actually produced any bookings or not. We're also looking to get a HQ right now in LA. We jammed about that yesterday. And so we could also come by for a visit if you're in LA, whatever you want. We're going to have a pool, in case anyone's wondering. So,
yeah, we'll definitely have to take you up on that. So, and I'll include links to your social here in the details of this recording. So, yeah, thanks again for joining us. This is really fun. So, thanks everyone for the questions. So,
yeah, thanks, guys.